You're listening to Don't Waste Water.
You are using your resources to generate sales. Of course, that makes sense. But you have a whole company that you're running. There's people's livelihood depend on the income that they make at Aquaporin. So there is a huge sense of responsibility. And so this idea that you have to go to the market and raise money and ensure that you have the money to reach break even is stressful. You can't get it out from always being top of mind or in the back of your head. I mean, it's always there.
Hello, bonjour, and welcome to the Don't Waste Water podcast.
Our introduction into the water space has been done into forward osmosis because of how close this mimics what happens in nature with the protein. It has not been a decision based on the market opportunity. The challenge with forward osmosis is that you kind of create a technology, but you also create a market, and you're competing against existing technologies that can do things really, really well, that have been around for a really long period of time.
I'm your host, Antoine Walter, and in today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Matt Boczkowski as my guest.
We believe that demonstrating this larger scale with the PUB is going to sort of accelerate how we also are perceived by OEMs in other parts of the world and give us this ability to bid projects that have a higher number of membrane elements. Our goal is to establish a supply chain that can do a lot of the activities that are required for us to scale up.
Matt is the CEO of Aquaporin.
You can actually see already a shift in our revenue profile. I think 2 years ago it was closer to 80-20 in terms of residential to non-residential. Then it shifted to about 70-30. Last year was 65-35. We're going into this kind of 50-50 split. That's where we'd like to be 4 or 5 years from now.
Aquaporin applies Nobel-Prize-Awarded research to develop biotechnology solutions for global water challenges. The water tech world has a few rock stars, like its first ever unicorn with Gradient, which you've heard in this season of the podcast, but also a trio of companies that went public somewhat at the same time: 374 Water, that's been here by season 4, Annex Filtration, who's agreed many times to come on the mic, but it didn't occur yet, and Aquaporin, who's on today with its CEO, Matt Boczkowski.
Did I pronounce it right?
Well,
Going public as a growth stage water tech company is not that straightforward. If you missed my YouTube video on the topic, the link is in the description. The timelines and expectations of the stock markets don't always align with the realities of the speed of adoption of water innovation. But water entrepreneurs and investors should be incredibly thankful for that trio of rockstar IPOs for at least 2 reasons. First, in being public, there's public, which means that all the milestones, the victories and the shortcomings, the profits and the cash struggles, everything is public, assuming you're ready to read quarterly and annual reports. And you don't need to be an entrepreneur to extract wisdom from that. The strategy or business development departments of most water companies would benefit hugely from getting real-life returns on what sticks and what doesn't in the cold-hearted world of water tech deployment. How fast do sales develop? Where? In which applications? To which customers? How profitable is all of that today, and how will it evolve? All of that and more is written in those reports if you do the little bit of gymnastics to sometimes read between the lines.
That sounds terrible when you say it like that.
Right.
Okay.
If you don't want to develop a passion for reading those, I've got you covered, because in today's conversation, Matt shares with a wealth of transparency how Aquaporin multiplied its sales by 6 since IPO and plans to double again while seeking to reach profitability in the midterm, how the sales balance, go-to-market and product-market fits evolved, but also how stressful it can be at times to manage a growth stage company's cash. Still, if you've never looked into an annual report, I'm linking you Aquaporin's 2023 release in the show notes. That way, we can share another weird passion together.
Thank you, I guess.
Now seriously, there's a second major perk in Aquaporin and the likes being public, and if you recall, it's something we discussed with Tom Ferguson on that very microphone. It's opening one more exit path for early stage water tech. Companies have gone public before, but going IPO at the stage where Annex 374 or Aquaporin did it is pretty new and offers an elegant alternative to being snapped by a major. And who knows, in the long run, it might also be a way to build new giants, as the most loyal listeners might get some ideas to connect the dots Matt adds this week to what we heard from Craig Beckman from Aqua Membranes not so long ago. Recording this episode wasn't without its hassle, as the internet gods were a bit against us that day, yet Matt's been incredible, and I think I managed to hide the glitches in editing, but you'll tell me. If I did, then take this episode and share it with a colleague, a friend, your boss or your team. If I didn't, come insult me in my LinkedIn DMs and I'll meet you on the other side. Hi, Matt. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Antoine.
I'm super pumped up to have that conversation for many reasons, but there's one which is probably much less known and probably much more anecdotic, which is we have a friend in common, actually maybe a friend for you, a mentor for me, Benoit Condomi. He was the boss of my boss when I was at Suez, and he had always good advice and regularly told me, if you really want to have Aquaporin on the show, I can make it happen. I know Matt and everything. So yeah, let's it be organic. At some point, we will have that conversation, and that some point is today. So I've listened to many Aquaporin appearances on various podcasts, and I have not always understood what you're doing because I'm stupid. And as soon as it goes into the complexities of, there's a protein who does this and that, I can be lost. But yeah, that was a very wordy intro. I read your 2023 annual report. So I looked a bit into what you're doing as of this year. So what's top of mind for Aquaporin now? And it sounds to me like you're going into a very specific segment in the market, which is the point of use treatment, which makes full sense. It's a growing part of the industry. What's so attractive in that segment for you? And what's the challenge which you solve there?
Thank you for the intro. And it's true that a lot of our revenue is coming from the point of view segment. I think it's been also a very strategic reason for us to enter into that segment. And it has to do with barriers to entry, actually. The barriers to entry to sell products in the point of view segment are simply lower than the barriers to entry in industrial water or forward osmosis, where you're creating a market. So we saw a lot of potential in a fairly large and growing market to offer the Aquaporin solution. The other reason is that with being one of the only sort of biomimetic companies out there, really one of the very few companies that have this protein technology that we put in our membranes, it does create a bit of a brand appeal as well. And this branding of water filtered by nature, of using something that's inspired by nature, speaks the loudest to the consumer, actually. And by speaking the loudest to the consumer, we saw this part of the market in which we can say, hey, we actually have something cool to offer to the consumer that allows our customers, because we do B2B, to have something that is a bit more different, a little bit differentiated compared to all the other purifiers that are out there. So that's a little bit how this thinking got us started, that, we're a startup, we've got to scale up. The easiest way to scale up for us in the first place is where the entry into the market is the easiest. And that's how we went into the point of use segment.
That is another thing which is very different with Aquaporin compared to the vast majority of the water sector. You have a super strong brand identity, which goes into the type of media you're pushing out, which goes into the way you present yourself on the market. And the fact that in the very first answer, you talk about branding makes me think that beyond the technology, that is also one of the main assets of the company. Am I wrong with that?
No, you couldn't be more right. I think we have a really strong marketing team. Our marketing actually is inspired not from the water industry, but from the fashion industry. So we have a marketing team that is very different from what I have seen in any other water companies. And some people might look at us and say, oh, this is odd. You guys are a water company, but you're presenting yourself a little bit different. I think that's really, really important. We stick out in terms of branding. We stick out in terms of our visual identity, but that is very much on purpose. It's not a fluke. It's part of our strategy to look and feel the way we do.
And that despite the fact that you're B2B, because different branding would make a ton of sense if you're B2C, but B2B, you have to stand out in exactly the same fashion.
The way we look at it is that we do B2B sales, but what is the value that we provide to those customers? So of course we provide the story, of course we provide the technology, we provide, the membrane, the innovation that we're still pursuing. But in addition to this, we provide a marketing platform, a marketing with stories, a marketing that allows our customer to take some of this Aquaporin brand identity and offer it to their consumers. If you look at, for instance, the way that Philips has been using some of the Aquaporin material in some of their videos that you can find on YouTube, where they're advertising their point of view tabletop purifiers, there is about 15 to 30 seconds of their ad that is actually using a lot of the brand identity and visuals from Aquaporin. This is something that we also make available to our partners. And so it's part of the sales package, in a way.
It's kind of a B2B2C move. If people have never looked at what we're discussing right now, the link to your website is in the description. And I would advise to look, just the way you deal with photography is already very different from anything else you see in that sector. And now that you say that the inspiration is fashion, makes a ton of sense. Before we go into the depth of that deep dive, I'd like to have your best elevator pitch to Aquaporin, which is usually the question everybody hates, but I think it's a good way to give a context.
It's actually really simple. We're a water tech company that allows our customers to be different in the market. And so if a customer is looking to have this differentiated value proposition, whether it's energy efficiency, whether it's a purifier that stands out compared to the other ones, whether it's a technology that concentrates things that cannot be done with standard evaporative processes, we may have that solution. And it's something that we really pride ourselves in our key account collaborative approach that we take. If a customer is really looking for something different to stand out in the market, then they need to knock on our door, because I think we have that solution.
In just that elevator pitch, you already gave us several hints about what we're going to discuss in a minute, because you mentioned the power efficiency, you mentioned the purifiers, but you also mentioned the evaporators. So we are in a bunch of different applications, different verticals, different words. And that's something which gets me super curious. So I really want to discuss that with you. Before that, I'd like to reintroduce a bit your company. And I'm going to just draw the history, and you stop me if I say something very, very stupid. And then we can discuss about the past 2-3 years.
Good.
If I'm right, the story of Aquaporin starts with the work of Peter Agre, who won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 2003. Not only for Aquaporin, but that was the main discovery for which he was granted the Nobel Prize. If I'm right as well, there's no direct link to your company. He's not part of your research team or whatever. But in 2005, Peter Holmer Jensen uses those discoveries in Aquaporin to create a company called Aquaporin, which looks into membranes and applies that aquaporin to make more efficient membranes. Usually, the other big milestone that people remember about Aquaporin is that in 2021, you became one of these 2-3 wonder kids in the sector, together with maybe NX Filtration and 374 Water, the very spectacular IPO, which made you a third of a unicorn. That got a lot of eyeballs looking at what you were doing. For the best, because it was a very successful IPO, but also probably for the challenging, because from now on, you were really under the scope of everybody which wanted to have an informed opinion about Aquaporin. That's roughly the time where you're joining the company. First, I would say you acclimated yourself to the company, and then after the IPO, you stepped in as the CEO. So far, so good?
So far, so good. You're correct in saying that the two Peters are unrelated. They have met each other. We have an RO membrane signed by Peter Agre as a sign of having aquaporins in the membrane, but you're absolutely correct. The Nobel Prize that he was awarded for the discovery of the aquaporin protein has nothing to do with Aquaporin, the company, other than inspiring us to try to figure out how to take this protein and apply it into a more industrial setting. So far, so good.
You mentioned some minutes ago that Aquaporin is a startup. When you join, Aquaporin is already 16, which is teenager startup, which is not exactly in the very, very early stage. What is your first impression when you join, and what was your number one perk and number one challenge you identified as the newly appointed CEO?
So it's a really cool question, because I spent most of my career in large companies, with the exception of one. I mean, I've been with Paul for a number of years, with GE and then Suez. So in those companies, you get used to a certain structure, you get used to a certain support mechanism that you have. If you have legal issues, there's a legal department. If you have IP, you have someone who's in charge of patents. They're well-oiled machines, in a way to speak. When I joined Aquaporin, this support structure was simply not there. So you come in and you have ideas on what you want to do, how you want to run things, and you realize that for a lot of the things that I would really like to do quickly, we actually don't have the sort of source of information or the expertise in-house. And so you immediately lack the sense of security that a large company provides to you. So that would be my first sort of like, oh, wow, this is different. I mean, I expected it, but it's always different when you live it. So you can imagine things, but it's only when you're thrown into the situation that you're like, oh, okay, that's how I feel in this situation. But on the positive side, if you're able to take that and quickly realize, okay, I can use it as an opportunity, I can now figure out what do I do with this, then you sort of empower yourself and you're able to make decisions a lot faster. How we're able to develop products, how we're able to take an idea and make that idea happen, it's probably 5 to 10 times faster than at a large company. And I think that's been sort of the biggest perk. You decide on a certain path, and the next day things start happening. There isn't a lot of steering committees, a lot of board reporting, a lot of meetings on top of meetings to ensure that everybody's on the same page, because you're smaller. So everybody's on the same page fairly quickly. So that's with regards to joining the company. And then with regards to the IPO, I think that the IPO gave us a different sense of credibility. So of course, being listed comes with its share of responsibilities, right? I mean, you have to be accountable to your shareholders. You have to be very transparent. You have to be careful how you communicate, what you communicate, in what order. You have to have an investor relations function. You have to have a very robust financial function. So all this we had to put in place. But this sense of additional credibility was really, really good, because it allowed us to have conversations with companies that previously we couldn't have access to. I think one example is, we work with Gallo in the United States. Gallo is the largest winemaker in the world. And the fact that we're able to work with such a company, the fact that we're able to have access to meet with their CEO and their CFO, that wouldn't have been possible as an unlisted company, in my opinion, because of the size, right? Because we've been around for 16 years at the time of the IPO, but our revenue was roughly €1 million at that point in time. So you still don't have that much to show for in terms of commercial traction. But if you have strong shareholders that are backing you, some very large Danish companies, some international shareholders, it gives the confidence to your customer that you're going to stay in business. When you're a startup, there's always this fear that hangs over your head, sort of like when you speak to large accounts, hey, how long are you going to be in business for? That impression went away with the IPO. And I think that's been really positive for us.
So does that mean that that was the first reason why you went IPO? Or was it just simply basically because you needed to raise money?
I think it's that, but also our board had an ambition to have the company public before I arrived. It's been part of the company strategy. And it's something that they wanted to also ensure that the company is backed by strong Danish investors, that the company has access to the Danish markets to raise liquidity. So I think those reasons are why they push for the company to become listed here. And it's also the nature of the Danish stock exchange.
Just to clarify that one, you listed on the Nasdaq Copenhagen, right?
Yes, in Copenhagen, because there is this mid-cap market in Copenhagen where you have companies like Aquaporin that get listed. And I think that's a little bit special to the Danish market. You do have a good number of companies being listed on what you call this mid-cap market. You have, of course, the top 25, and then you have your small cap, but it has a ton of other smaller companies that raise a few $1 million here and there. I'm originally from Poland, but I spent a lot of time in Canada. In Canada, you have the TSX Ventures. The TSX Ventures is a little bit like the small cap, but the mid cap, it provides you this ability to raise a significant amount of money to expand your company and its operations. That's what we went after, and that's where we were listed.
But what I mentioned about the scrutiny of your peers in the water sector, do you feel that? Because I can't really put my finger on it if it's they would also like to be a cool kid. If it's like, hey, if the cool kid crashes, then us, the reasonable kids, we are comforted in our business choices, or simply you're a shiny object, so you become a center of attraction.
I never really felt this, what you described this from my peers as envy or anything. I think when I speak to some of my colleagues at, let's say, NX Filtration, we're all trying to do a bit of the same thing, scale up a company, grow, get to profitability. That's how I see things. There are some smaller companies that I'm also interacting with that are not listed. And, when you speak to them about their strategies, some of them have an exit strategy to be listed. Some of them have an exit strategy to be acquired. So I think each company has its own strategy. For us, this was the right thing to do. I think there are some other companies that, for them, the right thing to do is to seek to be acquired by DuPont, by Veolia, by a company where there's a better strategic fit. That wasn't the thing for us. So for us, it was to get listed.
Maybe I didn't frame it right. What I'm trying to say is, in preparation for that discussion, I could read your annual report. So I have all your numbers. Basically, the full trunk is open. I can dive into the engine and I can look at everything, because you have to report on everything. Many startups at your stage just mention, we're not profitable, we're growing. Our numbers look good. Wait until we go public in 5 years, or until we do that exit you mentioned. You are under the microscope, as we don't have many reference points as to what is normal for a company at your stage. Well, we can look at it and say, hey, does that look weird? And then find an opinion. Do you feel that?
Yes. Yes, it is a little bit weird. It's not so much, I think, on our operations and what we do, because we are quite proud of how we do things and what we do. But absolutely, people can see that how much money we have at the end of the year. People can see things in terms of compensation. There's a lot of transparency. And I think it is something that it takes a little bit of time to getting used to, especially that you can't really compare us. You can't compare us to the private companies because you don't have that visibility to the unlisted companies. So I guess, to answer your question, is it normal? It's normal for us. The way we operate is normal for us. But it's true in the sense that we are a bit unique in the way that everything is transparent. Absolutely.
So to rewind a bit the Aquaporin story to probably before you joined, but you were working in the membrane field, so I would expect you to have an informed opinion on that. To me, the 2010s were the decades of the hype about forward osmosis, because it comes with much less pressure than reverse osmosis, because as such, it comes with less power requirements if you forget that you need to recover the draw. But there was really a push for that, which was fueled by Chinese capital, which I think is also part of your story. But if you look at who's still around 1 decade later, there's mostly Travis Systems and you. Many of the companies which were super hype in that for osmosis wave died. And that's not conventional in the water world, where really companies never die. They might be struggling, they might be living in Valhalla, whatever you want to call it, but they don't die. But in your sector, companies died. And yet, in that famous annual report, I see that you're working on top secrets for the osmosis stuff, which you also mentioned in some of your LinkedIn posts. And I'm wondering, is it because you believe the breakthrough will happen? Or is it because all the ones which died did it wrong and you have a strong path to make for the osmosis happen on the big stage?
Maybe we can go back a little bit in history as to why Aquaporin decided to go in the FO space. I can give you sort of my take on it. I was not here from the beginning, but at the foundation of the company, at the beginning, we are what you would call a biotechnology company. Our founder is a biotech guy. The core of what the company was doing 15, 16 years ago, or 20 years ago almost, it was very much biotechnology to begin with. The idea was to figure out, if you look at how the aquaporin protein works in nature, it actually facilitates a process of water transfer through osmosis or diffusion or it's a preferential water pathway for water molecules. So that concept lends itself really, really nicely to the simple concept of osmosis. And so if you take that and you say, okay, I want to borrow a concept from nature and apply this concept from nature into the industrial scale, then the most sort of immediate way that you see that could mimic that is actually regular osmosis, or what we call forward osmosis, because it's really the same. So that is why the Aquaporin's journey was into forward osmosis initially, because it just made sense of how things work in nature and how we thought we could make things work in an industrial application. Now, the challenge with forward osmosis is that you kind of create a technology, but you also create a market, and you're competing against existing technologies that can do things really, really well, that have been around for a really long period of time. You're looking at evaporation, you're looking at reverse osmosis, you're looking at all sorts of other separation processes in the food space. So I think one of the reasons why quite a few of the companies never made it is that it's not an existing market. You actually have to convince your customer that the forward osmosis application is the right way to go about it. And then they have to learn how the process works. They have to learn how to operate a system that is more complicated to operate than a reverse osmosis system. Right away, things like wastewater treatment, things like desalination, all that becomes a little bit less attractive because it's a lot more difficult to control with a forward osmosis system. You can use RO and you need more water, you just put more pressure, and it's kind of you get what you want by brute force. With forward osmosis, well, you need to figure out what kind of draw solution do you want to use, how is this balance is going to be done, and so on. And so our introduction into the water space has been done into forward osmosis because of how close this mimics what happens in nature with the protein. It has not been a decision based on the market opportunity. And this also brings me to why we have branched into reverse osmosis, because I think FO has some super cool applications and we have a few very niche areas in which we're working. And that's why I call them top secret. We have like an NDA for every single application that we're doing. We cannot survive as a forward osmosis company alone. That is not part of our strategy. We need to have a few other applications, and those other applications come from the RO space. Because in the RO space, you have an existing market. There you can create purifiers, create flat sheets, create industrial reverse osmosis membranes. If we're able to create superior products, if we're able to create a really strong brand, then we're able to generate revenue for Aquaporin that allows us to reinvest and continue the developments in forward osmosis. So for us, forward osmosis is something that we do in a few very unique areas. The ones that are public is, our application that we're developing with Gallo for the wine industry. We have something that we're also doing in a couple of other beverage spaces. We have a partnership with a company in Canada with whom we are working on some potential applications in the lithium space. We have a couple of things like that we're doing, but it's extremely, extremely, extremely targeted.
Which makes me wondering, it sounds like you have a good path to use the technology and make money in the RO space, which you would use to fund the forward osmosis space. But that means you need to have a strong belief that it will happen in forward osmosis. If not, it's like you're using your hardly earned pocket money to then finance ventures which might or might not take off. So what is your market assumption there? What is the kind of big vertical And I'm going to give you a hint, which is usually what people tell me, which is the zero liquid discharge market in India. If that one takes off as big as expected, then it justifies whatever we put into bringing in a better mousetrap. Do you have this kind of big bets that you're saying that market is going to explode? We need to have our FO ready by then.
We have sector-specific bets. We are working on an application in concentrating grape juice to a certain extent, to a certain level in the wine industry. There's a few very, very large wineries in the world that this could translate into very large FO systems for those companies. The reason why I'm mentioning this is that the development that we're doing in this particular case with Gallo allows us to create a large, scalable FO that we can then apply to a couple of other areas. The zero liquid discharge thing that you mentioned, we actually got out of that. It was a very big focus for us initially. We really wanted to be part of the zero liquid discharge in India. And we had been selected by Fashion for Good. We've been selected to do all sorts of trials. In the end, we had a really cool opportunity to treat textile wastewater. And it had to be justified by a small investment of, I think, 20 or 30,000 euros into a pilot unit. All those local companies that were very interested in this, well, 20,000 euros was too much for them. And so it went nowhere. And to me, that was a bit of a hint. I'm like, okay, well, look, if we're spending all this time on this and we have a cool solution and the company isn't even willing to invest 20,000 euros to build a pilot in India, for India, with local parts, local labor, everything, so it stays there. It's also good for the local economy and for the local people. Why continue if no one's really interested? They're interested on paper, but in reality, when they have to put money to something, they're not. So we got out of that. So our strategy in FO is actually very, very, very niche. Is we have to work in areas that create something very unique and different for the customer. So wine is one of them because they're a super cool partner. We are indirectly looking at lithium as well. We believe that our FO plays actually a really interesting part of a lithium purification flow sheet. We are looking also at some applications in the medical device industry. We actually don't have this way of looking at it that, hey, if this segment picks up, we have our FO products, which is going to be pushing them into that segment. We look at it a little bit the other way around. We say, okay, if there is a niche segment for which we can generate a really good solution, and this solution either creates a better product. You can imagine that we create a better, let's say, coffee concentrate, and the coffee tastes way better than what you can get today in the market. Then to us, this is a super cool application because it's enough for us to drive the FO business at Aquaporin to have, let's say, something successful in wine, in coffee, in some of those medical device applications. That is big enough for us. And I truly believe that the strategy that we took to focus on those very, very niche segments with customers that have run pilots, they've tested the products, they've actually, in many cases, they've tasted them, they've done all the analysis, and they've given us the thumbs up. That's where we put our effort. That's where we push.
I have one remark and then one question. The first remark is, it's pretty funny that you mentioned coffee and wine, because to my knowledge, Trevor System is working on beer. So maybe that is a direction which makes a ton of sense for water technologies. The second is a question where I guess your answer. Can you mention the name of the Canadian company you're working with for lithium topics?
I think it's Forward Water is who we're working with.
And so it's part of the lithium refining part, or is it part of the direct lithium extraction?
To be honest with you, I don't have a lot of information about the process. It's something that they are running the pilot. They are doing a lot of the work. What I know is that they share with us the data and they share with us what they're getting in terms of performance with our membranes. And then that's how we know that, okay, we're going in the right direction or not.
Which gives me a good segue to explain a bit your scope. And then I have also a devil's advocate question for you, but let's start with the segue.
Yeah.
You are a membrane company in the purest possible sense of that expression. You are developing and building membranes because many membrane companies end up doing modules, skids, whatever needs to be done in the vertical to get it adopted by the market. But you stayed in your lane and you said, we are membrane specialists. First, is that right? And second, why?
So it's almost right. In the small scale FO application, we offer small systems. We are actually in the process of finalizing standardized systems for FO that are going to be using either 4 or 8 membrane modules. And that is sometimes good enough for certain applications. Like for instance, in the aroma industry, you don't deal with very high flows, but it makes sense that you provide the full system because you have then the combination of the draw solution and the FO solution together. And you can optimize it so that the customer gets as much of a turnkey solution as possible. So when the scale is small in FO, we offer systems. In the point of use space, for large accounts, we will also source a system and we will sell a purifier. So it's not just the membrane in this case. But when it comes to industrial water, there we don't get into the system space. We really provide only membranes. And the reason is that we branched out quite far already from our core competence. When you look at our core competence being biotechnology, then that developed into, We brought in people that are membrane chemists that can make really good coatings, that can figure out how to reduce membrane fouling and so on. Then we brought in experts that can help us with membrane rolling. How can we roll a membrane in a way that is a bit more efficient than what's done in the market, or at least meet some of the top players in the market? So we have those competencies in-house. We also work with partners that are able to help us scale up production. So we can't produce millions and millions of flat sheet on our own, but we have partners with whom we work that can produce 20 million and more square meters of flat sheet a year. So that's how we meet our kind of scale of production for membranes. All of that also allows us to decrease the cost of production. But now if we were to venture into offering systems, it now means that we have to bring in more engineers. We have to bring in specialists that can design electrical and so on, instrumentation. And I think we can work with partners in the industry to offer such solutions. So we don't have to do it in-house on our own, but we haven't done that in this industrial membrane space yet. It just isn't part of our strategy. We want to focus on getting the traction with the membrane technology first. And then if we want to expand in the future, once we reach break even and we're looking for alternative ways to expand our growth, it could be something that we look at in the future, but it just isn't part of our strategy. I mean, we already have enough that we're doing. I think it would be just too much for where we are with our capacities today.
But it's interesting from a strategy perspective, exactly, because if I try to recall the conversations I've had on that microphone with other membrane companies, which are trying to push something which is aside from conventional PVDF or polyethersulfone membranes. If I look at the ceramic guys, the conversation I had with Sebastian Andreasen from Sembrane on that microphone with LickTech. If I look at even the new waves, like what Switter Co is doing, they all start with that strategy of we focus on the membrane, we build the scale, and when we have the scale, then our costs are good. And when the costs are good, then you look only at the benefits and it's going to sell. But then they bump into the problem, which you mentioned in the very beginning, which is that when there is an incumbent technology which is very well known, well, the barrier to adoption is so big that I can Google how to design a reverse osmosis, I will find some images which tell me roughly how to build my skid. If I Google how to do a forward osmosis application, chances are I'm getting lost and I'm saying, yeah, you know what? Do I really need to take all the headache for 20 or 30% better performance, which is huge, but might not be huge enough for me to take the risk. So what all the others have done is that they've gone into the modules and the systems, not by choice, but because they were forced because of market adoption. So what you're saying is that you take that bold move to say, no, we will make it so good that people can't just skip it. It's obvious that it's the technology of choice.
What you're referring to is, I think, when you have large scale-ups. So for instance, if we are working with small systems, with small skids, we can do this ourselves. Like we have a partner that is able to build. We've already delivered 3 small FO systems that are working quite well. We are building another one now that is going to be fully automated. So we have the capabilities to do that. I think the challenge happens when you start to scale up and you're starting to get into systems that have, thousands of FO membrane elements. That is where you get a little bit outside of our scope of what we can execute as a company. But so we have today 3 applications that could lead to those very, very large scale-ups. And in those 3 applications, in each particular case, there is an engineering company that is involved, that is part of this closed journey that we have with the customer. And that engineering company would take the scope to build and develop the project with us. And so we would provide process expertise on the draw solution and the feed solution, how to automate that and so on. But we have some really good engineering companies that are part of the circle because the end customers that we're working with are really high profile customers. So they allow us to bring in a couple of partners in those small circles of applications that we're developing. It's also why we look at the market in a very narrow niche lens. When we work with a company like Gallo, they actually have very strong engineering capabilities. They actually learned with us on how this works. And of course, I can't speak on their behalf, but I'm sure that there will be a very high interest from them on the engineering of such a project when the scale up happens. Our conversations with Forward Water on lithium are very similar. They have partnerships that would allow them to execute a large engineered project. And we have one more application that is touching produced water. And so in produced water, that is also an area where we have a partner that has delivered a lot of systems in the past, are familiar with things like water injection, produced water treatment, and so on. And they have expressed a strong desire to be involved with us if the scale up from pilot goes to a full scale project. So we try to organize it that way. So we have all the parties involved from the beginning, because I see it in a way that when we prove the concept, which we have in those 3 applications, we go to the pilot And we demonstrated we have now a way to scale up from something that requires hundreds or thousands of membranes. When we've proven that, and the customer is ready to now make the next investment and say, okay, now let's scale this up. We just can't afford to get it wrong. So we have to have the right partners in it from the beginning that believe in us, that believe in the technology, that have this trust of the customer as well.
You mentioned partners. You mentioned super high profile. You have mentioned Gallo and Philips. If I'm right, 90% of your revenue comes from 5 customers. So I would expect Gallo and Philips to be 2 of those 5. Before I go into that route of your go-to-market, there is one which maybe is already part of this 5, or which would have the profile to become one of the 5 and hence become the 6, probably in the future. It's what you're doing with PUB on reverse osmosis. Can you tell me that story? Because it sounds like kind of a game-changing potential.
Yeah, I mean, PUB for us, it's a customer with whom we've been working for quite some time. We have a strong technical and research team in Singapore. That Singapore team has been working closely with the PUB for a number of years. It all started by trying to develop a more energy efficient membrane in order to meet some of the energy efficiency goals that the PUB has set. And so we've piloted with them for over a year. And in this pilot, we've demonstrated approximately 30% energy efficiency compared to the targets that they had set in order to implement a new technology. And so we've done this, we've passed the pilot test, and we recently installed 500 membranes at the PUB so they can run a trial on a full train and see what is the performance of an Aquaporin membrane in that full train. That's what we're doing now. And so we expect that the results of that are going to confirm the energy efficiency. The PUB is an excellent reference, but it's also a very, very difficult reference because they have really high standards. They look at not just energy, they look at so many different things. It's hard for a company like us to meet every single specifications that they have. We figured if we can get that challenge right, if we can meet the expectations and demonstrate the energy efficiency, that gives us a really, really valuable reference. Today, we have small applications. Some of them are in the order of 100 membranes max with Aqualia, for instance, in some of the areas in Spain. We believe that demonstrating this larger scale with the PUB is going to sort of accelerate how we also are perceived by OEMs in other parts of the world, and give us this ability to bid projects that have a higher number of membrane elements. In Singapore, some of the water reuse plants, they have up to 10,000 membrane elements. The ultimate goal would be to eventually go from this trial that we're doing with the PUB to be approved, be on their vendors list, be one of the recommended technology providers, and have access to bidding some of those really large membrane projects. That's what I would like to see the company maybe in the next year or two.
Which brings me to my devil's advocate question I had held in the fridge before, which is, you're working with PUB. You do a pilot with PUB. The pilot is successful, proves that your RO technology is 30% better than the threshold that they had set. You go to the next stage, which is to have these 500 membranes, which might again prove that you have this 30% better energy efficiency than the threshold. You might go into the 10,000 module-ish plants of new water, which then opens you the door because once you're validated by Singapore, basically you're in one of the most well-known and ranked places in the world when it comes to water technology. So it's like having the stamp which says, good to go for the main market. Isn't it a sunk cost fallacy for you to keep pushing forward osmosis when you have that potential wonder child in the making with reverse osmosis?
I don't think so, because in forward osmosis, there are some applications that have a strong scale-up potential. A lot of the things that we do and that we develop is in partnerships with companies that help us to do this scale-up. We don't do everything on our own. For instance, when we make the RO membranes, we are working with partners that are helping us to develop the right quality flat sheet with our formulation. Where we work in FO, we work with fiber providers that help us figure out how to optimize our coatings, or we optimize the coatings, and then we try to work with them on how to scale up the fibers and so on. Our goal is to establish a supply chain that can do a lot of the activities that are required for us to scale up. We're 77 people at Aquaporin. We can't do all of it on our own. And I think where we are with FO, we are putting in the right resources for the applications that we can get, but we're not taking on more challenges in FO. Maybe that's another way to look at it. So it answers your question a little bit, because we're not looking at the water challenges in the world and how can we address this with FO. It's absolutely not that vision. It's more of a vision of what is really unique and what can we go after and what has a high chance of success and what has a high market potential. So this year, for instance, we have the Gallo project that we're developing. We have a partnership with FlavorTech, who is one of the leaders in the aroma industry that we're working with on a few applications. We have something that we're developing in produced water. There is something for the medical device industry that we're also looking at. I mean, this is, it's 4 applications. We can do this with our current team. There's a ton of cross use of the products. So the product that we develop in one area can be used in the other. It doesn't really necessarily require that much additional work for us to do that. I think the way we are organized is good for what we have, what we would like to deliver. If one of those applications are going to scale up successfully and they're going to demonstrate that what we have promised to the customers is indeed working out, then we'll look at a scale up in terms of repeatability. Our growth in info is going to depend on the success of one of those applications. So if you take coffee, if we're successful in coffee, we're going to do more coffee aroma type of applications. So that's how I look at it.
You mentioned how you're 76 people working for Aquaporin now. If I look at your product portfolio, you have 5 industrial arrow membrane families. So classic, fouling resistant, plus, ultra, and eco. Each of these families has, again, 4 subcategories in terms of sizes. You have a point of use reverse osmosis membrane line with, again, 4 sizes inside. You have a forward osmosis line, which, if I'm right, has also 4 sizes inside. And you have 2 water purifiers where you build the full unit. That's a lot of product for a 70-ish headcount team. How do you handle all of that? And does it mean that some of these products are kind of test things which you just push out, and if they don't work, then you would kill them and focus on the ones which would work?
Yeah, there's a bit of both here. Of course, there are certain products that we push out and we look how they perform. And then if we have a better product that's been developed, then we phase out the former product and we replace it by the better one. We have this kind of multi-generational development on the drinking water flat sheet. So, we initially had what we call the tap water or TWRO flat sheet. And we then developed the drinking water flat sheet. So it's basically a different flat sheet with a modified formulation that actually performs better in terms of flow and rejection. So we replaced the former product. So there is a strategy of not keeping all this product portfolio when we know that there's a second product that can do things equally or better than the previous one and at a better price with a better supply chain. So then we will phase out the former product. In drinking water, we have the drinking water flat sheet, and then we have a couple of different grades of that drinking water flat sheet. So we have a certain flow, then we have a higher flow and a much higher flow. The way that we look at stuff in drinking water is in terms of really all about energy efficiency and giving the most water in the smallest footprint possible for the membrane element. Then when we look at the brackish space, we actually had to develop a number of different membranes, because when we speak to potential customers and you're looking at certain large distributors, they like to work with us, but they can't just give us their business and have one membrane from Aquaporin. They need to have at least an equivalent of what they're selling from their other suppliers. So that means a few rejection levels. And the way that we actually create membranes is we start with a certain flat sheet, a certain type of rejection, and then we work on improving the flow of that membrane without impacting the rejection too much. That's what allows us to create a portfolio of products. And again, because we do everything with partners, it's something that, when we start discussion with partners, we ask them, okay, what do they have in their portfolio? What kind of flat sheets are they able to produce? And then we say, great, okay, you have these and these types of rejection. Now we need to work with you on applying the Aquaporin inside formulation. We spend quite a bit of time in doing this. And then we create, let's say, 2 or 3 types of rejections and flows for the production line of those partners. It's a long way to answer your question, but we do have, you're right, we do have a lot of products. It is a lot of work on the supply chain side. But it is driven by what the market expects from a membrane company. And I think that's the part maybe that is the most challenging, is that you get into this membrane space from biotechnology, and then you realize, okay, if I want to be in the drinking water space, that's fine. I can figure this out with the purifiers. It's not that specific in terms of how many different types of membranes you have. But when you go into the industrial water space, you have a ton of membranes. And I remember from the GE days looking at the membrane portfolio, you have pages and pages of membranes, and then you have 4-inch, 8-inch, 440, 400 square foot. Like, you very quickly end up having a huge portfolio. So I think in comparison to that, our portfolio is really, really small. But for a small company like Aquaporin, it is a lot of products on which we have to keep minimum order quantities, on which we have to ensure that we can deliver quickly to our distributors. So yeah, it is a lot.
It's super interesting because now it's 2 or 3 times that you mentioned the same thing, which is that drinking water is, it's okay, it's manageable, and industrial water is much more difficult. And that's super counterintuitive, because I would expect that, especially if you go into point of use and the sink applications, In drinking water, you would have to have a ton of certificates to hold and safety standards and legislations. Whereas, if something breaks in the industrial wastewater world, well, it's a big problem for the industrial, but at the end of the day, if they have a tank, they just put everything in a tank and they solve their problem and then they clean the tank. So is it really like that? You need to be super, super detailed in your offering in industrial world, which is a burden for a product company. But in drinking water, it's straightforward. Or are you just minimizing because to you, it's your daily bread? So drinking water is, it's hard if you start from scratch, but if you know what you're doing, it's okay.
It depends on what you sell. In drinking water, for instance, if you take what we're selling to Philips in China, we have to meet some requirements on the flat sheet. And so we provide just the flat sheet. Then how it's rolled into the element, how the element is used in the point of use purifier and all that is actually on the responsibility of our customer. So a lot of this burden that would go into, is the membrane meeting the minimum rejection requirements? Is the membrane meeting the minimum hardness requirements? People in China, for instance, when they get a purifier, the first thing they do, they check the TDS levels and the membrane has to meet that. But that's something we get as a spec from our customer, in this case, from Philips Water Solutions. We have to deliver on that, but it's their responsibility towards the end consumer. For us, that's the part that makes it a bit easier to manage, actually. If I look at some of the companies in the US that we are discussing, it's all about NSF certification. And some of them have different requirements. So in some cases, it can take up to a year to figure out all the different NSF requirements. But some other companies have lighter NSF requirements because they're okay with a certain level of criteria. Some other ones want to have more tests done. So it's also very customer specific. At the end of the day, both customers get the NSF stamp, but it's really on them to dictate what is it that they want to see. So I might have made it sound like it's easier. It's not that it's easier. I think it's just we have a few large customers that we're working with, and we're trying to make it as clear as possible as to what is it that they need in order to be able to sell their products in a select number of geographies. For instance, in Turkey, it was the same conversation. They had a certain number of things they needed to have done for Turkey. So we worked with our supplier to pass those requirements on to them, and they ensured that the purifier box met those requirements. We ensured that the membrane met the ones on the membrane. And then the full package was then certified and ready to go.
You mentioned the few key customers you have, and I already mentioned how you have 5 customers, which represents 90% of your sales. I would see 2 ways to look at that. The first is it's great because it streamlines your strategy. You have to focus on the needs of those 5. The other is it's a risk. If you lose one, it's a big section of your sales, which is going away. So how do you deal with that?
You're right. It's a risk, and we would like to have more key accounts. I'd like that maybe that number is not 5, but maybe 10. And we are working towards that. This is absolutely right. It's something that comes up very often in our discussions, that we need to have a way to have more accounts of significant revenue so that we can de-risk the revenue profile of the company. The timing to get solutions to the market in industrial water and for osmosis is a bit longer. So the initial diversification that is happening now is we have additional customers that we're developing in a point of view segment. So we have 5 large global brands with whom we're working today, where we would like to introduce Aquaporin inside as a key component of their technology, and also do this sort of co-branding strategy where it says, like it does for Philips, a Philips purifier powered by Aquaporin inside. So I'd like to have maybe an additional 4 large customers in the drinking water space that have this similar approach that we do with Philips. And it's been about a year now in the development, and we are now transitioning the conversation from technical to marketing. So that's just how it works. We spend the first 6 to 12 months doing technical assessments. Then the next part, once you get the check from the technical team, then you go to the marketing team. And that conversation tends to be a lot easier for us because of some of the proof points that we have in the marketing side already. So that's one way in which we're diversifying. And then with FO and in industrial water, for instance, the thing we talked about with the PUB, when we get, let's say, our first large membrane order as a consequence of having that reference, that also diversifies where the revenue is coming from. You can actually see already a shift in our revenue profile. I think 2 years ago was closer to 80-20 in terms of residential to non-residential. Then it shifted to about 70-30. Last year was 65-35. We're going into this kind of 50-50 split. That's where we'd like to be, 4 or 5 years from now.
You work on that transition in your sales and how you want to build up and I guess keep developing the sales. I have a positive first, which is if we look at your sales, you mentioned how when you joined and before the IPO, you were around 1 million. You tripled your sales in 2022. You doubled again in 2023. And you're projecting to double again in 2024. So that means that on that sales trajectory, it's taking off. Not to the extent probably of the IPO documents, but still it's taking off.
Yeah.
The other side of that coin is you're not profitable yet, and you're projecting to reach profitability in 2 to 3 years. One of the downsides we discussed being public is that everybody looks at all your results, and you ended up last year being pretty short on cash, which you've solved beginning of this year because you've raised $25 million. So you're, again, floating for at least long enough for your strategy to come into force. How stressful is that as the CEO of the company?
That is one thing that took me a bit of getting used to. This idea that, okay, you are using your resources to generate sales. Of course, that makes sense. But, you have a whole company that you're running. There's people's livelihoods depend on the income that they make at Aquaporin. So there is a huge sense of responsibility. And so this idea that you have to go to the market and raise money and ensure that you have the money to reach break even is stressful. You can't get it out from always being top of mind or in the back of your head. I mean, it's always there, but you have to find a way to deal with it. Aquaporin has some really, really fantastic shareholders. We have people that have been on the Aquaporin journey for, some of them for over 10 years. They've always supported us. We did this capital injection, not the one that with the rights issue now, but the one before. And the major shareholders all came through. We did this rights issue. And again, they were there to support us. So knowing that we have this kind of support does alleviate a little bit of that risk. Despite all the regulatory aspects of being a listed company, one of the things that's also really, really good is that you have a board of directors that is a very professional board of directors that also has high visibility and is accountable for the decisions of the company. And that board is really good at helping us with raising the money, with identifying potential shareholders, existing shareholders. And that's what allows me to sort of, sleep at night during those times of capital increase, that things are going to work out. And they have worked out for us. IPO and the small injection we did thereafter, and now in this rights issue. I think one of the things that is important to say about the rights issue is that we really hope and believe that this is the last capital increase that we're doing. This is where this break even becomes really important, because we have raised the money with the sight that within 2 to 3 years, we're going to have that break even situation. And then at that point, we should be able to self-sustain the operation of the company. So that's the kind of direction in which we're going.
But break-even can be a target or can be a consequence. I'll give you an example from my conversation with Peter Christou from Swirltex. He was saying that Swirltex is nearing the break-even, and he would wish that it wasn't the case, because he would rather focus on growth, and then profitability will end up happening at some point as a consequence of that. If you're saying that's the last capital raise you're doing, then that means that profitability becomes your North Star. So isn't that somewhat of an impediment of maybe your growth? Or is it a necessary evil? You need to build a strong foundation on which you can then build the next stage of the company.
I think it's the latter. I think achieving break even is what our shareholders that have invested in the company want to see. This is something that we've promised to them. And I think this is going to demonstrate that Aquaporin has been true to their word, that this is the last capital increase for them that is necessary to achieve break even. That's how I look at that sort of first, if you want, stage of the company. Then I think once we're profitable, this opens up a new stage of the company. And of course, you can always go out to the markets as a listed company. But I think when you do that, when you reach break even, it's a very different conversation in terms of bringing new investors into the company, or part of this rights issue that we've done. When you're our size in terms of revenue, you're not necessarily that appealing to the larger investors. They want to see companies that make, $100 million, or they definitely have broken even and have demonstrated growth. Then you get on the radar in a more meaningful way. And they're looking to invest. There's a lot of money actually out there that wants to invest money in companies. And the water space was and is still very attractive. But I think we need to get to that profitability. We need to demonstrate that we have been able to deliver on that. And that opens up new opportunities for Aquaporin. That's why we're kind of looking this in a two-phased way. We have what we need to get to break even. Then we take the company from there into, sort of the second stage of growth, if you want.
So that leads me to my closing question in this deep dive, which is kind of a crystal ball question, which is always the most difficult questions for a listed company, because that's typically the kind of questions you're not allowed to answer. But I'll try my luck. You mentioned the second stage of growth. Where do you see Aquaporin in 5 years, in 10 years? You mentioned 100 million. Is that an aspirational target, or is it like just you will try to take that reasonable growth, and wherever it takes you, it takes you?
You're spot on in saying that it's a tough question for a listed company, because we talk about what's publicly available, right? So where do I want to see the company in 5 years? I think we are break even in 5 years. I have this vision of the company that there's one aspect we didn't talk about, but I think it has to do with our core technology. So what we call the core technology at Aquaporin is really the Aquaporin protein. And it's an additive that is used today in membranes. It should be looked at as an additive in the same way that people use different chemical additives. We have this biological additive. It's been a really big challenge for us to find a way to easily incorporate this stabilized formulation into a sort of agnostic way into, let's say, a membrane from a Veolia, a membrane from DuPont, a membrane from somebody else. It's not easy. People need to open up their chemistry. We need to figure out how to make the two work and so on. But one of the things that I have asked our technology team is to try to figure out how could we make this Aquaporin protein structure a little bit more agnostic to the polyamide layer that we're working with. And I would really like us to be in a few years with that technology at a level where we could have a very meaningful conversation with a film tech membrane or with a Veolia membrane and say, hey, you know what? We have this structure that you can't get anywhere else. And this structure, we know exactly how to make it work on your membrane. And by working on your membrane, we're going to give it an extra 20, 30, whatever % increase. If we could do that for someone's desalination membrane, I think that opens up some super cool opportunity that we haven't had the chance to address today. It's the kind of thing that excites me about Aquaporin. So 5 years from now, I would like that to be a reality. I can't give you what kind of revenue contribution it's going to give to the company because it depends on what business model we would go after with such an offering. But I would like that to be the case where we have this building block that we can, with a lot of certainty and maybe ease, incorporate in somebody else's polyamide layer. Then I'd like us to have success with Gallo. If you ask me in 5 years, there's an FO project standing that's concentrating grape juice, that is actually doing stuff in the wine industry in a very, very different way that it's done today. And I can't, say much more about it. But that is sort of, to me, success in FO is that project.
You're very right in saying that there's so much more we should have discussed. And that's just a sign that we have to take that one, the prequel of a next one. There's a lot which I'd like to cover, but I'd like to have one very last one in this deep dive, which is about outer space. Right now, if I'm right, your products are in the International Space Station. What can you tell me about that one, which is not top secret?
No, not top secret. So our products are back from the International Space Station. We actually unboxed them here at Aquaporin. We received the unit back. So what we're doing there is, in 2015, we've sent our first FO module to be tested to extract water from an astronaut's urine. And the idea was to figure out how can we reuse as much water as possible for space exploration, for space journeys. And in 2015, the feedback we got is that all the modules, all the cables were all getting tangled up and everything. It was kind of funny to hear the astronaut speak about this because he's like, hey guys, we need to make this a bit easier for me when I'm in space, no gravity, so keep this in mind. This year, we sent our FO units that in a really sort of nice prepackaged way. And the feedback we got is that this was the simplest experiment he's ever done. So, on that level, mission accomplished. But what we're trying to figure out is how can you reuse, well, practically as close as possible to 100% of the water in a space environment? Because if we're ever thinking about, going further and further out in space, there's a ton of things we have to figure out for us as humanity to do that. But one of the things we have to figure out is how to reuse water. And that's the part that we decided that, okay, let's be part of this journey. Let's try to work with the European Space Agency and then with NASA to figure out how can this be done. A bunch of tests were conducted. The results are being now analyzed. So we have to see what the results yielded, what the results provided to us. This is not, a money generating endeavor for Aquaporin. We get some sponsorships, we get some money reimbursed, but it's nothing that has a significant impact on the bottom line of the company. It's fantastic from a branding perspective. It's fantastic from a technology perspective. It gets a lot of people very excited to work on this project at Aquaporin. It's something that is very close to our DNA because we do a ton of stuff through open innovation collaborations. So we're really proud of everything that this has done for the company because we have been on the news in Denmark quite a lot, actually, since the leader of the space mission was Danish. We got him to talk about our membrane. We got to meet him. We had some of our people from the technology team do a couple of kids shows on how to reuse water from urine and wastewater. So it gave us a ton of traction and a ton of visibility. So that's been probably the biggest perk of the space mission for us.
It's interesting because it goes along what we said in the very beginning, which is that's part of your branding platform. That probably gives you a lot of earned media, which many companies in the sector would kill to have. So that's one thing. The other thing is I'm going to steal some wisdom from a conversation I had with John Webley from Trevi System about what you're saying about it doesn't make money today. Yeah, but there are, and I'm not quite sure about the number, but 30,000 something islands in the world. And on an island, it can be troublesome to get energy. It can be troublesome to get water and all of that kind of stuff, which means it's not outer space, but it's what resembles the most outer space on Earth. And having a good system to deal with that might be a way to have a water source which is sustainable. So I understand what you're saying about it's not money generating. I would add the word today at the end, because maybe someone down the line, that might be the second, third, or fourth wave of growth S-curve which you have on your path, which makes me a clear conclusion, which is that you have to be back and not too late in the future because we have much more to discuss. But for today, I have to be cautious of your time, so I propose you to switch to the rapid fire questions.
It's time for the rapid fire questions.
What is the toughest challenge, in your opinion, for a water tech startup?
I think it's to get your first repeat customers.
What would be your best single piece of advice for the founders and managers of the about 1,000 early stage water startups?
I think it's to focus on one application and make it successful, get that reference, and use that to grow other applications thereafter.
What's the drop of knowledge you wish more investors knew about the water sector?
That a lot of the growth is incremental. People tend to look for those home runs, like in the pharma industry where you get a clinical trial and then like, boom, you're $1 billion company. No, the water space is incremental, and it's a big problem for the planet as to what is happening with our water situation. So they have to look at it that their gains are also going to be incremental as the technologies are, and it's how it is, but they have to look at it from a lens of doing something also for the greater good and not just from an investment point of view.
I'm not opening the segue, I'm planting a seed. That's true if you're a water company. If you're a biotech, it might be slightly different. And if I'm right, you qualify yourself as a biotech and as a water company. So maybe the biotech could be. But yeah, I'm not opening the segue.
Rapid fire.
What was your most unexpected partnership and what did it bring you?
So the most unexpected partnerships have been our collaborators on the flat sheet membrane. I think we have a partnership with a company in China, and it's incredible how the pace at which things get done in China is out of this world. You say something on a Monday, it's done on a Tuesday. And that for a startup or a scale-up company is really valuable because your time is limited as long as your resources are limited. So you need to act fast. And China acts extremely, extremely fast.
I think you already answered the next one, but I'm going to ask nevertheless, profitability or growth?
Growth.
Interesting. I was expecting profitability, but okay, it's a good one. What's the next profile you'll hire?
Sales.
When you hire, are you looking for sector experience or startup experience?
Sector experience.
Opening new markets or doubling down on the current ones?
Doubling down.
What's that tool nobody speaks about, but you couldn't live without?
I think I could not live without Google right now. It's incredible how much information is available for free if you know what to look for, how to look for it, and how to use it. It's kind of a bit of a basic answer, but I would say, yeah, a lot of our stuff that we do is we use the internet and Google and the information that's publicly available.
I think it's a good one. It's good to have a reminder sometimes that to have the shiny things, you need the basic stuff, and internet today is on the bottom of the Maslow pyramid. So what's the single piece of insight your ideal customer profile needs to hear right now?
I think that if our customers are looking for a differentiated value proposition, I think we have that.
What are you desperately needing and want to raise an open call for right now?
We are looking at Aquaporin to commercialize industrial brackish membranes in China. We're going to be at WaterTech, and I think that's something that, if anyone who listens from your podcast in China wants to come and see us, they should do that. The other thing is the US. For us, the US are very much an untapped business, and we are going to be looking at the US also as an area of growth. I also would welcome very much conversations with the US companies, particularly in the drinking water side. I think a lot of them have fantastic products that are sold globally, so this is something that we're actively trying to do right now.
Have you ever been on Paul Gagliardo's podcast, The Water Entrepreneur? Okay,
no, I have not.
I need to put you in contact with him because in the rapid fire question, when I had him on the microphone when he was launching his podcast, the set of questions was slightly different, and I can't remember what my question exactly was, but his answer was that the technology company which he would like to see in the future is a technology leveraging aquaporins. And I was like, there's a company doing that. So I think that is a good link to make, and he's super well connected in the US ecosystem. So, and it's a very cool podcast. That's a recommendation I would make for free to anyone. But yeah, just connecting the dots. Last question, what can and should I do for you besides introducing you to Paul?
I think you just answered that now, but I think that, we want to get more visibility. We keep wanting to get more visibility. So I think just doing what we're doing here today, hosting this webcast, allowing us to reach more customers, getting people curious about Aquaporin, any kind of introductions based on what you've heard from me, based on some of the other people that you spoke to in the past. If you see some of the dots that you could connect, that would be extremely, extremely valuable for us, because I can't do that. I mean, I can try, but you have the super cool privilege to have those podcasters. So if you see some of those links, I would really, really appreciate it.
Well, happy to connect the dots if I can. Where can I redirect people to connect with you after that conversation if they want to follow up?
I think people can email me. My email is on our website. They can really easily reach out to me that way. If they reach out to you personally, you have my email too. They can absolutely send me an email, give me a call. If they would like to have a bit more information, just generally speaking about the company, we try to keep our website not just nice and sexy, but also up to date. So they can have the information there too. We try to make it as user-friendly as possible.
As always, the links to all of that are in the description, so check them out. Matt, I guess that editing magic is going to make our conversation look like it was super flowing despite the technical difficulties which we had during the recording because the platform was really glitchy. It was a super pleasure to have you nevertheless. Thanks a lot for all the openness in everything you shared. And I'm looking forward to the next steps.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Antoine.
Thanks for listening to Don't Waste Water. This podcast was brought to you by GF Piping Systems. Loved this episode? Head over to Apple Podcasts to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. See you next time.